In this first section, we've seen the important role that the United Nations have played for the explicit recognition of the human right to water and sanitation, and for its legitimization as an idea, as a concept, and as a tool to orient and inspire public policies. And I think the formulation of the Sustainable Development Goals is an example of this, particularly when it comes to water. In fact, as it was recalled in the speech, in the video of the speech by the UN Special Rapporteur Catarina d'Albuquerque, the human right to water and sanitation is one of the few human rights explicitly mentioned in the main documents of the Sustainable Development Goals. But what does this recognition mean in practice? I think we can qualify the UN approach to the human right to water and sanitation essentially as a technical approach. What do I mean with this? First of all, as we've seen, particularly in the first video, the main issues related to access to water and the main obstacles identified to the fulfillment of the right to water, the human right to water and sanitation, are considered technical issues, such as lack of infrastructures or water pollution. And consequently, the main actors who are legitimized to frame and to address those issues are technical and independent experts, neutral people such as the Special Rapporteur, and those are the actors who should plan policies and intervention to implement the human right to water and sanitation against, for instance, what the UN Special Rapporteur in the same speech identified as irrational or emotional debates on the right to water, particularly referring to the debate whether water should be considered as a human right or an economic commodity. In this context, who are the right holders? You have seen them also in the video, particularly in the first videos. The right holders are identified as the most vulnerable, those lacking proper infrastructures to access to water and sanitation. But those right holders seem to remain mainly passive. They are the target of international cooperation programs, they are the beneficiaries of international aid, and most of the time they are portrayed either as children or as women, mostly coming from African countries. You can really see it in the cover of most of the UN reports on water and development. Also the solution identified to fulfill, to implement and promote the human right to water and sanitation mainly pertain to the technical realms. We're talking about improved infrastructures and improve availability of water, water security, and so on. These solutions mainly involved action at individual level, as it was, for instance, emphasized in the first video when it was discussed the need for individual actions more efficient and less water polluting. As a consequence of this, equity and inequality are also mainly addressed from a technical perspective. Definitely, as acknowledged by the Special Rapporteur, With the SDGs are going a step further compared to the Millennium Development Goals, in the sense that the SDG targets for universal access rather than simply looking at averages, as it was the case of the MDGs. So the SDGs aims at covering and ensuring universal access rather than just halving the percentage of population without access to water and sanitation. But the main approach to equity seems to remain, as I was saying, technically. Equity is something that can be technically, neutrally measured by experts through identifying proper indicators. So equity is translated in measurable outputs, mostly linked to infrastructures, which of course are easier to monitor into measures than people and social or political processes. So to conclude this first section, the UN technical approach to the human right to water and sanitation and to equity issues looks like an ahistorical and apolitical, and we could even say aecological approach to. They are not political or historical reference to situate those figures about inequality. Is inequality and lack of access to water a problem of scarcity or a problem of distribution? Why there are not infrastructures, or why the water is polluted in specific place? Of course, the human right to water and sanitation takes into account issues related to political participation, non-discrimination, accountability, but those issues seem to remain silent and they are not explicitly addressed by UN official documents and framework on the SDGs. So I think now we can move to have a look at how social movements have used the same concept, the very same idea of the right to access to water and sanitation in their political struggles against the privatization of water services.